Like getting robbed was just life, right? It was just part of life.
Mm-hmm.
When you live in that much poverty, having two pairs of shorts means you have more, right?
Right.
So 9 years old was when I first learned that lesson myself.
Growing up in the jungle. So
The Joben story.
tell me about what it was like growing up in the jungle.
It was normal. I mean, for me, it felt typical. It felt
Mm-hmm.
like this is just what every kid experiences. The weird part was coming back to North America and people saying, um, "Oh man, it must feel so nice to be home." When I knew nothing about North America, it was totally foreign to me. But every person that saw me only saw like my skin. They only saw a gringo, and so they're like, "Now you're finally not a fish out of water. Now you're home."
Mm-hmm.
But for me, every time that I wasn't overseas, I felt like I was trying to learn how to function, survive, fit in, um, with no clue, no roadmap or guide for really how to do that. My parents didn't have any of the information I needed because that was their home culture. They were home. It was just the kids in the family that were just trying to figure out what to do, how to fit in. But actually living in the jungle was amazing. It's
Okay,
a
so rewind. How did you end up living in the jungle?
You know how people say that they're adventurous
Mm-hmm.
and then they tell you some story about how they went to this like curated experience and they, stayed at a resort, all inclusive, yada yada. My dad went to the Amazon rainforest, pre-internet, no ability to communicate, got dropped off in the middle of the nowhere and cut airstrips, and then had them parachute food into him. The same time, my mom was she was 19 years old, and she traveled to Peru with my papa, her dad, who worked for Purina Foods and had a doctorate in agriculture, and he was down there working on developing a locally sourced chicken feed. So super cool. It would have worked, except for the people that they hired to help him ate the food, so it threw off the results. But my mom was down there for the summer. My dad had been in Peru for about a year at this point, and he was cutting airstrips during the summer. They crossed paths, hung out for 3 weeks, and that was enough to convince each other that they were the perfect match for each other. They got married and then decided to live there for 25 years.
Okay, so your parents meet in the jungle in Peru in the 70s and end up living there for 25 years.
Hardcore adventurers, yes.
And they raise 4 kids
Yep,
in the middle of the jungle. So you're the product of that.
I am.
Okay. So that is not a typical or normal upbringing,
No.
right? But you feel like it was normal.
Yeah, it was normal for me. I mean, all of our childhoods are normal to us.
Sure.
Like they're typical to us, whether we experience trauma or easy street or, kids that grow up with tons of wealth around them, they experience that as normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of our challenges in our adult life is just coming to terms with like, okay, this was my experience, but nobody shares that exact experience, right? I
Right.
believe we're a product of nature, nurture, and choice. And so our nature being our biological hardwiring, our nurture being the life events that happen to us, and then some of the control over who we become lies in the third category of choice, right? But you can take people that have the exact same personality type, right? They'll score the exact same on all those assessments and stuff. But you put them through a different set of life experiences, and they're going to turn out differently. They're going to have different passions. They're going to have different fears, different anxieties, and so I think a lot of our adult life is coming to terms with the fact that like, oh, I'm the only one that's experiencing this the way I'm experiencing it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's experiencing it a little bit differently, and so growing up in the jungle was amazing. And then, as my uncle said, when I was 18 years old, I was my parents dropped me off, and they're leaving to go back to the jungle, and
Where did
I'm
they drop you off?
at my uncle's house in Calgary, Alberta, and the van's rounding the corner. My family's driving away to go back to home, and I'm stuck in Canada. And my uncle goes, "Well, that chapter ended. It's time to turn the page. Dinner's at 6." And walked inside. And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And he wasn't wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It was a dose of reality that I don't know if I was ready for it, but I needed to hear. And he definitely said it in love. My uncle had been a bush pilot in Papua New Guinea, and so he had watched his children go through some of the same things. My cousins, Neil and Heather, and so he was just giving me reality. But that was yeah, it was when I turned 18. It wasn't really that the chapter changed. It's that that book was done, and
Mm-hmm.
now it's time to start writing a new book.
What did that feel like for you?
Um, it felt like it felt like starting over with nothing. And for the first time in my life, I visually and physically fit in with everyone. I looked just like everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but everything you couldn't see was totally different. And so I remember I got to college and we did a dorm date with a girls' dorm. It was to help us like get to know people. And we're in this big circle. There are about 40 of us. We're in this big circle. And they're going around and they're saying something. It was this quick rapid fire, your name, where you're from, like where you grew up, and then your favorite pet.
Icebreakers.
Icebreakers, yeah. My first time doing an icebreaker. And so it's going around. And remember, up to this point, every person I grew up with, I had known my whole life in the jungle, and they knew me as Joben.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea that nobody has the name Joben. I didn't know my dad had made it up. It didn't. It just was like,
You
oh,
didn't know it was a unique name.
no idea. It was
Right.
just Joben. That was it, and that is how my family, my parents say it with a stress on the Ben. But it was just Joben. That's just my name, like Bill
Mm-hmm.
or Chris. It was just like a regular name. And so it comes around, and I go first. First thing I say is I said, "Hi, my name's Joben." Silence, right? People trying to process this new name they've never heard as a human name or a person name before, people name.
There
And
actually are a lot of Jobens in Indonesia, right?
I can't remember if it's Indonesia or the Philippines or something like that. It's a very common name in a different language, but there's no gringos with the name
Right.
Joben. And so then I say where I'm from, and I'm like Yarina Kocha. Silence. So in my head I'm like, oh yeah, that's a tiny little. I should have said the nearest city. So I'm like, sorry, Pucallpa. Nothing. Crickets, right? So then I just push through. I'm like, all right, favorite pet. And I'm still thinking that every word I'm saying is normal, typical, and will resonate with everyone. So I'm like, favorite pet had to be the monkey. That's probably my favorite pet. Silence, right? So in my head, I've said, hi, my name's Christopher. I'm from New York, and my favorite pet was a puppy I had in 4th
Mm-hmm.
grade. But what everybody else heard was, right? Like, couldn't even understand the words. And so that moment was kind of like an early moment where I came to the realization I'm like, oh man, nothing that who I am is built on is going to resonate with anyone.
Do you think that it hit you in that moment, or do you think it took time? Because I feel like I'm hearing that you were naive to that fact, and I think your naivety. How do you say that
Yeah,
word?
sure.
I think that maybe you being sort of like aloof, sort of served you because you went into this
Probably.
situation
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah, well, I mean, so growing up in Peru, my name actually translates to young man. So Joben is Hoban, which means young man. And so I've always felt very popular and well known. And a lot of that was informed by, going to the local mercado to go buy, Christmas presents and having people be like, oi, joven, and they're trying to call me over. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
come buy stuff from them. And I'm thinking, man, I mean, I'm in a city of, I've traveled into the city. I rarely come here um, from the little jungle community we lived in. Maybe 300,000 people live here, and somehow they know my name, calling me by name. No one else is getting called by name, but I'm getting called, hey, Joben, come over here, buy our stuff. And I'm like, I mean, they do know my name. I might as well purchase from them, right? So then I'm 14 years old, and I hear this lady's like, oi, joven, but she's looking at my friend Danielle, and I'm like, oh, no. Él se llama Daniel. His name is Daniel. And two heads like turn and look at me like, what are you talking about? That was the moment I realized like, oh, I'm not near as well known as I thought I
Somehow
was,
I
right?
feel like it didn't deflate your confidence,
It did
but
not. No, it did not. It
right.
actually just kind of gave me the fire to go and make myself
Uh-huh.
be known, right? So I feel like I've always had this um just this sense of I can do what it takes to fit in and figure it out, or to figure out how to fit in.
Mhm.
I don't have to be the same as everybody. I just got to figure out the language and the words so I can say all the right things. And what I had to learn though was that interesting stories that no one can relate to are interesting for a bit.
Hmm.
And then it's so different and so abstract and so unexpected because you're expecting, gringo, white dude, blue eyes. You're not expecting a kid that, spent his first 18 years in the Amazon rainforest living right on the headwaters of the Amazon River. And so it was really easy to get attention quickly,
Mhm.
but friends took longer
Hmm.
because people would they tune you out, and you're trying so hard to find connection points that you're missing the fact that they've tuned you out.
Mhm.
And so you eventually get to the point where you're like, okay, I got to just figure out what are the little bits I can give that tell enough of who I am so that they're getting to know me without without confusing everyone, right? And then the other thing was is that growing up how I did, there's lots of transition, there's lots of turnover of friends,
Mhm.
and there's people that come and go, and so you what you do is if you're like use the analogy of a fire, you burn really hot, really bright, really quickly because you might only be in each other's lives for 2 months, and so we're gonna cut to the chase. Do we have what it takes to mesh and gel and get along and hang out and have fun? Perfect. Let's hang out every single day, right?
And so just to clarify, you grew up on a 1 square mile missionary base
Correct.
in the middle of the jungle, and there were people from all over the world who came to live here. And so people would come and go because they would serve for a term and then leave. So
Yep.
you did have friends from North America, from Europe, from different
Yep.
countries in the world. So not just local Peruvian friends.
And the people that were there were an eclectic group, right? So if you're familiar with church talk, there's different denominations. We weren't non-denominational, so it wasn't like the organization didn't have a denomination. We were interdenominational,
Hmm.
and so it was everybody coming and just figuring out how to get along.
It's like the UN.
Yeah, like
Like,
the UN. So for me, like um, I had a hard time understanding why people couldn't just figure out how to get along because that was modeled for me
mm,
my whole life. I'm sure the adults had interpersonal stuff that they hid really well from the kids,
right.
but they still learned how to get along and be kind, right? And so we didn't have our little church didn't have a preacher. Everyone rotated through. So one day, one Sunday, you'd be taught by the Jewish guy who would speak for 2.5 hours, and then the next Sunday you'd have our favorite Dan Hudson, who is a former missionary kid who had grown up just like us, and then returned as a mechanic to help repair vehicles and stuff. And he would talk for like 17 minutes and be like, "Well, that's all I have," and he'd get like from the kids, it was basically a standing ovation. I mean, he
Sure.
was our favorite, right? Um, and so that's the other thing too is it when people think of missionaries, they probably have a specific picture in their mind. My parents were school teachers, and so they taught kids.
Hmm.
My mom taught me at least one grade all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade.
Great strategy.
That has some challenges uh,
As
for
a
me.
many can say
Yeah,
that's a great strategy.
that created challenges for them and for
Hmm.
me. But it was that was challenging. We were
One thing I just want to say, I want to back up because something hit me when you said, I asked you how you felt when you were going to college in Canada, straight out of the jungle, and you said that it was like starting over,
yeah,
right? And I think probably a lot of kids, if not all of the kids at your university, felt like that.
yeah, that's probably
And I
true.
think you probably didn't realize it at the time, but you probably all felt that way.
Yeah,
And you were all trying to kind of figure out how to fit in and where your place was and how to adapt, you know?
yeah, it's probably true. I think the hardest part wasn't starting over. It was the fact that everyone thought that I was the same as them because I
Mm-hmm.
looked the same,
Mm-hmm.
but I had way more gaps.
So let's touch on that because I know what TCK is. That's third culture kid. But can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So for kids like me that grow up internationally and our parents didn't, what happens is that within our home we have a specific culture that looks, sounds, feels a lot like the culture that our parents came from.
Mm-hmm.
But when you step out the front door of the house, everything else is a different culture, right? And so for ease of understanding, we'll assign colors. So my parents' culture, this first world culture and the first world way of thinking, was yellow. And I look yellow. I have the skin of a yellow culture. I have the blue eyes of a yellow culture. I have perfect English from the yellow culture. But all around me was this third world culture, this community, and we'll call it blue, right? So um, my parents are creating a little pocket of yellow, but it's sitting in the middle of blue. So I'm being heavily influenced by both cultures,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm also neither. The Peruvians were I grew up in Peru, so the Peruvians were never going to look at me and be like, "Oh, there's a Peruvian." They're going to look at me and say like, "Oh, there's a North American, there's a Canadian, there's an American." Um, the Coming back to North America, they also would look at me and they'd be like, "Oh, you're an American, just like us." And that "just like us" part, that was the hurdle because I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, but I didn't know how to articulate that. I didn't know how to show it. I just made mistakes and said dumb stuff and did
Mm-hmm.
dumb things. And so what I really am is I'm not either. I will never fully be blue. I'm 46 years old. I've lived here in North America since I was 18. I'm still not blue. I don't think like blues. I don't think like North Americans. I don't talk like North Americans other than the language. Um, I don't make decisions with my finances, with my business, with my family. I don't prioritize the same way that the blue culture does, the North American culture. But I also understand that I am not the yellow culture.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. My passport says very clearly that I'm not a Latino, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not South American. I'm a gringo from a Canadian father and an American mother. And what I am though is that when you take those two circles and you slide them and so that a little sliver overlaps, you get green, right? And so I'm my own culture. That's the third culture kit. So everybody sees the two cultures, the yellow and the blue, and then you overlap them and you create this green sliver. So whenever I'm in the same room or in an experience or on a team or networking with other people that have a similar experience, it's not just missionary kids. It's military kids, it's expat kids, it's business kids, it's there's a whole bunch of us. Just there's a lot of missionary kids that fit in the category. Um, but what I didn't realize and what I've only you know come to a better understanding as I've lived here is that um, the world sees only in primary colors, and so they can't see green, and so they're confused,
Mm-hmm.
and it creates challenges with creating close friendships. There's all kinds of things that greens do. Greens typically, like I was saying, they burn really bright. And I mean that in the sense of like overshare
Mm-hmm.
on the first hangout, right? Let me tell you everything about myself. You tell me everything about you. We're gonna make
I've
a quick decision.
experienced that
Yeah,
firsthand.
you've experienced it, and so it's just because we don't know. Like time isn't secure for us,
Mm-hmm.
because time, it's connected to your home, your hometown, and that's the stability of time, right?
Yeah.
Most people can go back home and have familiar stuff, right? I can never go back home. There is no home anymore. It's gone. All the
What's
people have
that like?
gone.
What is that like for you?
It just feels like most people get to have an anchor,
Mm-hmm.
for better or worse, that ties them to the past. And I have an anchor that I'm dragging with me,
Hmm.
and it's not rooted anywhere. And so there's nothing to go back to recenter myself, unless I'm with the people that are connected to that anchor, right? And so it's like we have all these people connected to the same anchor, and we're all kind of dragging it around. And when we cross paths, it feels like home.
Hmm.
And so that's why I can see friends I grew up with who I haven't seen in 20 years, and it's just like these are the best of times. Those are the best of times with the best of people, right? So I will I will man that I'll be exhausted, and I'm an extrovert, but I'll be exhausted because I'm just on for the entire. I don't want to miss a second. If we have a 4-day weekend together,
Because it feels like home.
it feels like home, right? And so I'm getting a little tiny taste of home. And it's kind of fun when our significant others see us all together, because then they're like, oh, like, okay, there's a thing here.
You're all
There,
weird.
yeah, yeah. We're all different.
Okay.
So what was that like for you? I remember the first time you were around all of us,
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of us together. What was that like for you?
I think it wasn't as strange as it would have been for somebody who's not me. I grew up in an immigrant family, and I think that I can relate a lot to that idea. You know, my grandparents were all political refugees, my parents are immigrants. That that journey means that we don't have those generational ties to where I grew up
Mhm.
either. And I and I also, there's been funny parallels to how we grew up and the things that anchor people or make people feel like at home have been taken from me. Like the house that I grew up in has been torn down and there's apartment buildings there now. And so I can't go back to my childhood home either, just like you can't. And so, yeah, there's a place where I can go back to, same as you, but that that childhood home is no longer there. And so I totally get what you're saying about that anchor. The anchor is your memories, the people, your experiences that nobody can really take that from you.
Yeah.
So I get it. And I think I understood it from that, right from the jump. So it wasn't like an odd experience for me, but it was really interesting to see you with your people, kind of um, that community and that closeness. It was beautiful to watch, actually, like to see you um, just feel completely understood and seen,
Mhm.
because I've seen you feel so misunderstood and unseen in so many
Yeah, it
scenarios.
still happens today, all the
Right.
time.
So how do you deal with that? Is that you I heard you say that it's challenging. Is it challenging for other people or is it challenging for you?
Is what challenging?
Being so different, and you were talking about people sort of shutting off because they don't understand, so then
Yeah.
they just check out. Is that challenging for them or is it challenging for you?
I think I think that challenging can be restated in two different ways, and then the answer is yes for both. I think it's challenging for other people because it's uncomfortable, and I think it's challenging for me because it's frustrating.
Mhm.
Being green, the green. Go back to the colors. Being green means that I can walk in the North American first world, and I can walk in a third world, and
Mhm.
I can understand. I have the advantages of the access to the first world economy, and I can understand how to maximize the impact of using that access in a third world country. And so it gets frustrating when when I see so many people bring their blue filter to try to help yellow, and I'm like,
Not going to
I'm
work.
it's not going to work. Like, it's not going to work. You're doing another little project that turns into an Instagram moment, but it's not actually going to change anything. And it
Mhm.
might actually your good
I think you can see it a
project.
mile away,
Yeah,
right?
I'll give you an example. So, say a group goes overseas and they're going to run this fun children's camp. And they've decided, what would be great is if we got a picture that we could blow up and put on the wall at our, organization headquarters of all the children wearing matching camp shirts. We're going to create this amazing 2-week experience. They go down there. The kids are so excited. It's the best quality t-shirt they've ever gotten.
Mhm.
Everyone's excited. It says like camp 2024, right? And it's matching. It's really super cool. The problem is that you've brought this down there. You've brought the highest quality shirt they've ever had. How could anything be wrong with that? Well, the issue is that there's a family there that's been creating, screening, selling T-shirts for 3 generations, right? And now no children need a shirt for a year because they just got the best quality T-shirt they've ever gotten.
Mhm.
And so that family that was relying on that income and that business, well, it's gone. So now they have no income. And then the ripple, the trickle of that is that now the generation that was having their education paid for by this business, now they can't afford an education anymore. And education is power, especially when you come from poverty. And it can be typical education like school education, but there's also street smarts. There's learning trades. There's all kinds of stuff, right? But
Mm-hmm.
but most of that costs money, and now you've just taken away the revenue stream from a family. So you came down for 2 weeks, ran a great thing, and you put a family out of business forever. And so, how was that a positive for the
Mm-hmm.
community? But nobody watching on Instagram knows or even thinks about that. But I see it. And so my thought is like, okay, what about like what did they actually need from you? Like what benefited the community the most? What if that money went towards maybe they've had no access to clean water and you spent 5 to 7 grand on shirts for everybody? What if you dug a well?
Mm-hmm.
Like why wouldn't you do that? And it's like I often see blues showing up with a blue agenda in a yellow environment,
Mm-hmm.
and it never has the impact that they believe it's going to have. It never has the impact that they believe they did have, and it never turns out quite how Instagram makes it look.
Right.
And so
So
that's
this,
frustrating for me.
yeah, of
But I
course.
think also the other side of that is like it is less painful when you don't have to look and think about the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you solve the problems of a third world? How does one person solve it? And so if you can't jump into that and start trying to figure out how you can be involved in the solve, maybe because of lack of experience, lack of whatever, it's just easier if it's over there. And so now you have a green walking around that doesn't look like a blue, and you start trying to ask questions, and then you start hearing a lot about yellow, and it can be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I was not getting emotional. I just caught something in my throat there. I sometimes do get emotional. Rarely. That was not it. um, so that's where I think it's both of those things at the same time.
So your perspective is a superpower, and I've always seen that. I think that's something that you've sort of come to realize in more recent years.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've seen you really struggle with that sort of fish out of water, feeling unseen, not really seeing that perspective as valued,
Yeah.
right? But in recent years, I've seen you do a lot of inner work and come to this realization that this perspective is a superpower. So, how can you use this superpower moving forward?
I think it's just recognizing it for what it is. It's
Mm-hmm.
one foot in each culture. It's an overlap of blue and yellow, neither one or the other. But I do have community within green, and when I meet other greens, it's pretty awesome. And so like Joben, recharge your battery right now. You're with the green,
Hmm.
right? I think Kermit the Frog said it best when he said it isn't easy being green. But at the end of the song, he says, "But I think it's what I want to be." And so that's where I've landed is, yeah, it isn't easy being green. It isn't easy looking like you fit in perfectly, looking like you fill the role, are the part, but inside feeling very different and wondering like, how could you possibly think that? And so then you become impatient and you just think, okay, if I just explain it one more time, they're gonna get it. When the reality is that a huge majority of people aren't going to get it and
Mm-hmm.
don't want to put in the effort to get it because it's uncomfortable. And because getting it means that they now start to understand the hurt of third world countries and of cyclically underserved and underdeveloped communities. And that hurt is uncomfortable. And so I carry that hurt around all the time. Um,
Because you can't unknow it,
I
you
can't
can't
unknow
unsee
it,
it.
right? I can't unknow and I can't unsee what
Mm-hmm.
I've seen. And so how do I build patience, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've gone through a recent experience where our office was robbed, and it was traumatizing to all of our staff. And I have to navigate that and find ways to express accurately the compassion that I do feel for them, while also experiencing the reality of we were robbed 8 times in 6 months. People broke into our home while we were there. They violated our space while we were in it. I had people, when the power went off, the fans go off, and so then you wake up. I think they have it in the South in the U.S. as well, same sort of thing. But in South America, it happen all the time. And so then when the power comes back on, the fans comes back on. And so what happens is, um, all the floodlights that we had put around our house after we got robbed so many times, they would flick on. You know, the fans come on, they flick on. So when the power went off, I went out to get a drink of water, looking out the window. Um, and we were up on bricks. The house was up on bricks.
How old were you?
I was 12. We're up on bricks. I'm looking out the window, and the power comes back on. My 3-year-old brother at the time was there with me, and the power comes on, and then there's 14 men in our yard with machetes, and I'm like, okay. And so I was 12. Like, what would a North American 12-year-old do? Probably not what I did. I grabbed my pellet gun and I ran out the door after him. And I timed it so that when the first that what people don't understand is that when people are stealing or when they're coming to do something, they don't want to get seen. They don't want a bright light on them, right? They're going to run. And especially if they hear a door open. You can't see anything. You can't when you're looking towards bright lights, you can't see anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so door opens, they hear a yell, they take off running, and I knew the direction they were running. And so when right when the first guy ran into the barbed wire fence that I knew was there, I shot him in the butt with a pellet. Well, all the people saw was that they saw this silhouetted, shadowy figure run out with a gun, and then they saw the gun get raised, and then they heard their friend or their accomplice scream. Right,
Mm-hmm.
had nothing to do with the pellet. It was like a 10 pump, and I maybe got 2 pumps into it. It was all the barbed wire fence that was making them scream. But like, so that's my experience, right?
Right.
And so then I'm talking to adults, and they went to an area and found things missing, and that was super traumatic for them. So I have to. This is a perfect
But
example.
you have to reconcile within yourself that these are people who grew up in North America in an environment
We can
that
say it, sheltered.
is
Yeah,
nothing like how you grew up.
nothing like it.
And
Yep,
so you have to then come to terms with that and have some empathy,
yep.
right? Like, and like you said, patience. And do you feel like that patience has grown as you've aged and matured?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think when I was, if I was 18 and that happened, I would have just laughed.
Right.
If people are like, "We're not coming into work. We found that something had been stolen." Oh, were you there when it was stolen? No. Was it yours? No. Did they threaten you? No. Was there terrorism activity going on all around you? No. Okay, so what's the problem?
Right.
Like, getting robbed was just life, right? It was just part of life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you live in that much poverty, having 2 pairs of shorts means you have more, right?
Right.
So 9 years old was when I first learned that lesson myself. I was at a soccer game and we were playing shirts and skins, and there was a kid in his underwear,
Mm-hmm.
and I laughed and I said, "Oh, it's shirts and skins, not shorts and skins, buddy." And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, I don't own a pair of shorts." I took my shorts off, and immediately I took my shorts off and I handed them to him, and then I walked home and I cried the whole way home. Partly because I was embarrassed about what I said, and partly because I was embarrassed that I wasn't wearing any shorts. Right, I was just wearing underwear, little 9-year-old whitey tighties walking home. And but I just made a commitment to myself. I said I'm never going to put myself in a position. I'm never going to say anything that might accidentally make fun of someone's poverty. Never going to do that, right? And so I took these things and learned lessons.
Mm-hmm.
I trust and believe that our staff that has experienced this recent break in, that they'll also learn stuff. But I have to give a lot of grace and a lot
Mm-hmm.
of compassion, because it is traumatic. And my mom was sharing with me recently that all the break-ins were super traumatic for her.
Hmm.
I had no idea. I was a kid, right? And they protected us from that, from those feelings. But for people who, we work with little kids. There's a little kid soccer company. Everybody's, lovey-dovey, hugs and feelings. This is the industry we're in. For that to get violated, it just feels so wrong.
Right.
And so they're navigating this trauma. They're navigating the distress. They're navigating the loss. They're figuring all that out. And for some of them, it's probably the first time they've gone through that. And so it feels, you feel vulnerable, and it's overwhelming. And so I'm 46. I'm not like scoffing at their feelings and telling
Because
them
you
how
can,
they should
I mean, you
feel.
can relate to feeling vulnerable and
Yeah.
overwhelmed, and also this was a violation. It's your business. It's a violation to you and to I. Um, but when you have a different perspective, it just informs how you react,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, within the same 3 weeks, we had our director in Cameroon get tortured. We had all of our taxis get stolen. We had all of our director's belongings taken from him. And so I'm like, I'm going through that trauma with my close friend from Cameroon. And then we have like some computers stolen when no one was there, and we have a few documents taken and stuff.
So
And
in
so
comparison,
I compare, right?
mm-hmm.
And the younger version, earlier version of me would compare and then be like,
Dismiss.
well, then dismiss, be like,
Mm-hmm.
this is nothing. This is a 1 out of 10, and I would tell them this is a 1 out of 10.
Yeah.
But the issue with that is that they're not experiencing it as a 1 out of 10.
Right.
It's a 10 out of 10. And then I just came and told them like it's not that big a deal, and or I would have, right. And you can't do that.
Right.
You have to validate what everyone's going through, and then when things die down, you can use it to teach, and you can say like, okay, you know how violating that felt. Um, this is what happened to our team in Cameroon, and sharing with it. And there's going to be a different layer of compassion
Right.
and empathy than has ever been there before. And so I'm looking at we get robbed. And, we had 5 computers stolen. We had all of our tablets stolen. We had a bunch of stuff stolen, valuable stuff, and documents and credit cards that then got used. And I'm looking at all that, and I'm like, it's not that big a deal.
Right.
But the where I am now today as a business owner and as someone who's a TCK who's been living in a different culture than I was raised in for a long time is I'm like, oh, this could actually be a positive. A
Hmm.
lot of times my brain works that way. Like, how do we get to the silver lining? Um, even our director in Cameroon, like, well, forced to evacuate and flee after getting tortured. Everything's stolen and taken, but now we're in a bigger city. Now we can restart our taxi company, and it's going to generate more revenue. We can do more projects. That's where Kingsley and I got to.
Do you feel like you attract people who have that same state of mind or that perspective, even if they aren't a TCK or if they grew up in a different way or a different place than you? Do you think that people can have that perspective without having the same experience as you?
I think they can learn that perspective. They can learn to appreciate that perspective. But our perspective is our perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if someone gets robbed for the first time, and they know that I've been robbed many, many, many times in my life, including like to my face, coming into the rooms I was sleeping in and stealing, armed robberies, like that's not their reality. And so they're never going to be able to filter their life through my filter. Never. But um, can we be sympathetic? And I think that sympathy grows when we're open minded to listen and hear to other people's perspectives, and their feelings about something, which is exactly what I have to do with them, right? I have to have sympathy for how they're experiencing it, as some of them probably the first time they've
Mm-hmm.
experienced loss through robbery and break in, right? So I think that this is a moment that's going to be a positive for our organization long term. I think people are going to, when we talk about when people, the projects we support and sponsor, we owned a generator for 24 hours in Cameroon. It was a $5,000 generator that we purchased for our farm. And just so people understand what $5,000 is, people live on $350 a month. And we bought a $5,000 generator. And then the terrorists came and took it from us after 24 hours. But they replaced it with a different stolen one that was way worse, which took us 10 days to figure out where to return it. But um, I think that our staff now, it it's different when you move from sympathy to empathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sympathy is like, I'm really sorry that you're going through that. Empathy is like, man, I feel for you.
It resonates with
Yeah,
you.
I can feel the feeling. You got robbed and you feel violated. I've been violated like that. I know what that feels like,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to care differently, right?
So, how can we have people feel that resonance, that same feeling without actually going through the same experiences that we've gone through or that you've gone through? If people have gone through terrible experiences and they want to connect with people and have them feel that same level of empathy, how can we bridge that gap?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
I don't know if we can
Hmm.
put that on anybody. I think it's their own decision to show up. So how can we create a space where they don't feel judged for not having experienced it, right?
Right.
How can I share a story in a way that doesn't make them feel less than or worse about themselves because they've never gone through that hard thing? How can I make it easy for people to allow themselves to actually feel what those people are feeling and to connect it to something in their life that may be different but have evoked some similar emotions, right? And so I think the worst thing you can do is dismiss their version of the experience because your version feels like a 10 out of 10 and theirs feels like a 1 out of
Mm-hmm.
10. Not saying specifically the robbery because that was not a
Sure.
1 out of 10. It was definitely not cool. But there's a lot of times where people are like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about, and then they tell you some story, and it's all you can do to not yawn 3 times in a straight. So you're like, I just told you about a major trauma, a major event, and you told me that you like one time lost a $5 bill in the laundry, and you think that's the same thing. That's what it feels like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how can you genuinely and authentically allow space for their experience to sit next to this other experience without judging how bad they were or
Just
how big they were?
acceptance.
Just
Yep.
accept it
Yep.
and say like, hey, maybe this isn't the same, but maybe they're doing it because they're trying to tell you that they care.
Mm-hmm.
And so can I accept their story about their experience as like I care? Because I do that. When people tell me something, I will tell them something, and it's not a one up, which is how it can be experienced. But my personality type wants to tell you a story similar because I want you to know I understand and I feel so bad for you. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't feel that way to other people, and so you have to grow, mature, develop, and understand that only your personality type will appreciate the story on the story on the story. Um, and so, can you sit there and be like, man, that's really hard?
Yeah.
And then in a different time, share a different hard story that you had, right? That's 46 versus 16. So, going back to 18 years old, I know none of that, and nobody else knows any of it. And so, how do I not one up every single person by accident when I'm just trying to tell a story? Like, oh yeah, one time my dog died. Oh really? One time, da 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 da, and they killed my
Right.
dog, and they did like, how do you do
Do you
that,
feel
right?
like
So
you did do that a lot?
I feel like I told a lot of stories, and nobody really understood the words.
Mm.
They didn't have any context. You have to remember, like I came back before the internet, so no one was Googling Amazon rainforest. Nobody knew what a spider monkey and a howler monkey looked like. Like nobody knew um, what anything looked like where came from. Nobody knew what the food was like. Nobody. So I'm eating food. I'm like, this is the worst, most bland, flavorless,
Shake and bake
unseasoned
chicken.
food. Yeah, the chicken. Like Peru, in Peru, we believe that all of the meat should have flavor on it, in it,
Not just the
not just
outside.
the outside, not the skin crisped up with a little
Right.
bit of seasoning on it. And so every time I ate like a rubbery, bland chicken, I'm like, what a waste of a bird. But you can't say that if somebody
Sure.
to dinner and you're like, oh, I guess you didn't want to prepare it. You just fake and baked it.
Well, thanks for sharing your story. I know that, the human experience is something where I think collectively we're all learning from each other all the time. And when you have such a unique experience of growing up uh, as a third culture kid, it can help people, I think, see things in a new way. And I think your perspective is really important. And I hope that it resonated with somebody listening.
Thank you.